In the cool light of dawn, May stood in her weaver's shop behind a narrow village street. The air was crisp with winter's breath, and she could hear distant footsteps on the frosty earth. Across the lane, near the well where villagers fetched water, a young man sat against an old oak tree, his hands folded over his knees, eyes closed. May watched him for a moment before stepping out onto her porch. She walked to the well with a bucket and paused there, turning her face to the cold sun, which offered little warmth but much light. Returning to her shop, she found her gaze drawn back outside, toward the young man still sitting by the oak. She stepped back out, this time moving closer to where he sat. He opened his eyes when she approached and looked up at her with a faint smile. May knelt beside him without speaking. "Cold?" she asked softly, noticing how quiet everything was around them. The world seemed suspended in time and space. "No," the young man replied, shaking his head slightly. "Just still." May nodded, understanding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden comb she kept for weaving her hair at night. Holding it between her fingers, she handed it to him without words. The comb felt smooth against his palm. "Thank you," he said quietly, running his thumb over the polished surface. He then opened the lid of a small tin box he had brought with him and carefully placed the comb inside before closing it again. The young man took off his jacket and handed it to May. "I can see your hands are cold." Surprised by this offer but appreciating it, she hesitated only a moment before taking the jacket. It smelled of wood smoke and earth, carrying with it the faint trace of a stranger's life. Together they sat for some time in the quiet morning air, May holding the warmth of his jacket close to her chest as he closed his eyes once more. Comb nestled safely beside him now in the tin box. The only sounds were the distant stirrings of the waking village and the soft crackle of frost beneath their feet. When a thin layer of sunlight finally began to soften the landscape, May stood up first. She offered the jacket back with a smile that held gratitude and respect for his quiet company. The young man looked up at her as she returned it, then reached into his pocket again and produced a small paper bird folded from what seemed like an old receipt. He extended it toward her, eyes asking if she would take it. May took the delicate creation with 2 fingers, examining its simple lines of creased paper that somehow formed wings and a tail. She smiled at him, not needing words to express her appreciation or wonderment. He nodded, standing up now as well. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the street in the direction of town, his steps making barely any sound against the quiet earth. May watched until he disappeared around a corner, then returned to her shop with the paper bird clasped gently in one hand. As she placed it on an old wooden shelf filled with other tiny wonders, she heard the faint but clear ring of frost breaking under someone's boots as they walked away from her life, taking only moments of cold and quiet with them.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. The paper bird trembled slightly on the shelf as if stirred by an unseen breeze. Then morning light filled a narrow alley between old stone houses.
At dawn, in a narrow alley between old stone houses, Molly knelt beside her clay pots. She was the only candlemaker in town, and every morning she began by scraping wax into neat piles before the sun crept over the rooftops. Today, as she worked with wooden spoons and knives, her hands moving slowly and surely, a man appeared at the edge of the alley. "Good morning," he said softly, leaning against a nearby wall. His voice was soft, like the crackle of a well-burned candle. Molly glanced up but didn't pause in her work. "Morning." He watched her for a moment before stepping closer to look at her candles, some tall and slender, others short and stubby, each with its unique imprint from Molly's tools. "These are beautiful," he said, his voice less hesitant now. She smiled, lifting a finished candle by the wick. "They're useful too. Is there a place I can buy one?" He looked around but there was nothing to see, just clay pots and tools spread out on newspapers. "In my shop downtown," she replied, returning to her scraping and smoothing. "But that's not here." She pointed towards the open alleyway where his shadow stretched long against the stones behind him. "Would you sell me one now?" His eyes caught the glow of the morning light filtering into the narrow space. Molly stopped, considering for a moment before nodding slowly. She selected a candle wrapped with a thin strip of paper that smelled faintly of pine and handed it to him. He took it carefully between his fingers, tracing the small lines where her tools had left their marks. "Thank you," he said again, this time without asking or needing an answer. He moved back towards the wall but paused, as if remembering something important. "There's a storm coming," he murmured more to himself than Molly, though she heard it clearly over the morning stillness. "A big one." She listened carefully for a moment before going back to her work, nodding slightly in acknowledgement of his words. The man stayed there quietly until he saw that Molly was finished with her early morning preparations and had begun arranging candles inside their boxes. Then, without another word or even looking directly at her, he turned and left the alley just as quickly as he'd arrived, carrying the candle held tightly in one hand. Molly watched him go, then looked down at her hands still moving with purpose around the pots and tools. She wrapped up the last of today's candles and put them aside, knowing she would open her shop later to sell them, no hurry now. When the sun rose higher over the rooftops, casting long shadows that touched every corner of the alley, Molly stood up from her workbench and took off her apron, folding it neatly as if setting aside the day's labor until tomorrow. She locked the wooden door behind her and walked away down a different street than the man had taken, carrying nothing but her own quiet thoughts. At the end of this simple task, she felt something, perhaps relief or peace, and reached into her pocket to find the small coin he'd left for the candle on its wrapping paper. She looked at it for a moment before placing it back in her pocket with the others she'd saved from yesterday and walked towards home, where the day would unfold not only around her but also within her hands as they had done this morning with wax and wick.
As Molly finished her work, the door to her shop creaked softly in the wind. Under low clouds, the salt flats stretched out in autumn dusk.
Under the low-hanging clouds of an autumn evening, the salt flat stretched out in a vast expanse, its surface glistening with the day's residue. At one edge stood a small wooden shack where Anna tended her solitary trade, selling dried fish to passing travelers. The door was half open, and the light within flickered from the lamp she used for her work. Late that afternoon, as Anna bent over her tools, smoothing out strings of fish with practiced hands, she heard soft footsteps approach. A stranger entered quietly, a man in rough clothes with calloused fingers, eyes searching the room but not landing anywhere long enough to rest. He moved hesitantly toward the counter where dried fish hung from hooks and baskets held salted herrings. "Are these your own?" he asked softly, nodding at the display. Anna straightened up, dusting off her apron with steady hands. "Yes, they are." He picked up a handful of the smaller ones, letting them fall through his fingers like leaves in autumn wind. They caught the light and shimmered slightly before settling back onto the counter. "I need to carry these far," he said after a moment's pause. "They'll be my only sustenance for days." Anna nodded without speaking, her gaze steady on him as she wrapped the fish in brown paper with care, tucking them inside a sturdy cloth bag. The man placed coins into Anna's hand and held his palm open to receive what was due, but she did not return it immediately. Instead, she stared at it for a long moment, as if studying its age-old marks of wear, before closing her fingers around it gently, then returning it back to him with no more than a look. They stood like this for a few seconds, a transaction paused midair, weightless between them, and then he nodded slowly and turned to leave. The door clicked softly behind him as the lamp's glow dimmed slightly in his wake. Anna watched him go until she could see only the faint dusting of autumn leaves swirling around his boots before he was swallowed by the vastness beyond her little shack. She closed the door with a sense of finality, then moved to the window to gaze out at the flat and still salt pan stretching towards darkness. She didn't look back when she heard another set of footsteps approach from behind the counter. A young boy had entered without making a sound, setting down a large basket beside her that was half his size. It contained fresh vegetables he must have picked from nearby fields or gardens. "Thought you might need these," he said quietly before turning to leave as silently as he had come. Anna's eyes followed him for a moment longer, then shifted back to the counter where she found 2 eggs nestled in the basket amongst the leaves and soil. She looked at them thoughtfully, remembering how long ago someone else had left such tokens of unexpected kindness, seeds that now bloomed around her without cease. She reached into the basket slowly, as if touching water, cupping one egg carefully between both hands. Outside, a single leaf drifted down from an unseen branch and settled noiselessly on the salt flat.
Anna's lantern flame swayed once, steadying again as dawn lit the quiet alley and paper lanterns in a small clay-walled shop.
In the quiet alley between 2 clay walls, morning light crept in through cracks and gaps, illuminating dust motes floating lazily. On one side of the alley was a small shop selling handcrafted paper lanterns. The other side held an old woman's home where she tended to her garden, now turning golden under the autumn sun. The old woman had been sitting on a low stool in front of her door, hands cupped around a tiny bowl of seeds. She looked up as a soft tread approached behind her. Ephraim, the salt merchant, was returning from his morning walk through the market square. "Good day," he said quietly, stopping to bow slightly. The old woman smiled and nodded back, still holding the bowl carefully. "You're planting again?" Ephraim asked gently, eyeing the seeds nestled in her palms like delicate jewels. "I am. Always trying," she replied simply, her voice a soft whisper of wind through leaves. "Come have some tea." Ephraim accepted without hesitation and stepped into her small home where he was greeted by the warm scent of simmering herbs. She set 2 cups on a low table beside an oil lamp that cast long shadows across faded rugs. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as steam rose from the cups before them. Outside, leaves rustled softly with the breeze and birds sang from nearby trees. Ephraim drank slowly, watching her hand movements, gentle yet precise, as she poured out more tea for him when his cup was empty. "How many times have you planted these?" he finally asked, pointing to a patch in the garden where rows of seedlings stretched toward the sun. "Too many," she said with a faint smile. "I never quite get it right." Ephraim looked at her hands, noticing how they trembled slightly as she reached for another cup. Yet there was strength and resolve too. He could see from the way she straightened back when pouring tea or leaning forward to touch her garden soil. "Do you think about giving up?" Ephraim asked softly after a pause, his eyes never leaving hers. She paused briefly before answering, "Sometimes I do, but then something keeps me here." He nodded, understanding but not pressing further. Instead, they moved into another silence as the light changed and shadows grew longer outside. After a while, he rose to leave, bowing again at the doorway. "Thank you for this," Ephraim said quietly. The old woman watched him go, her fingers still curled protectively around the seed bowl until it was time to plant once more.
Another lantern flame swayed gently at day's end as market stalls brimmed with vegetables and fish.
In a village square on a market day, amidst stalls brimming with vegetables and fish, sat an old woman selling tea. Her stall was modest, nothing more than a small table covered in worn cloth where she placed her cups and thermoses filled with steaming brews. The sun was beginning to wane, casting long shadows over the bustling square, when a traveling musician arrived with his instrument case clutched tightly under one arm. The musician paused near the old woman's stall, eyeing it curiously before approaching. He set down his case and pulled out a stool from another nearby vendor without being asked, then sat beside the tea seller. The old woman didn't look up immediately but continued to fill her cups with careful hands, each motion slow yet precise. "Good afternoon," he said softly, not interrupting her work. She glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to her preparations. "Afternoon." He watched her for a moment, noticing how the light caught her silver hair and made it glow like strands of moonlight. The silence between them was comfortable, though filled with an unspoken tension that seemed as old as the village itself. "I heard there's a festival tomorrow," he remarked finally, breaking into the quiet. "I thought I might stop by here again." The old woman nodded, her movements never faltering. "Festivals bring people together." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees and studying her hands as they moved back and forth with practiced ease. "I have a broken string," he offered after another pause. "Can't play tonight's set like this." She hummed softly in acknowledgement but kept working at her own pace, unwavering. "There was something I wanted to ask you," the musician said then, his voice softer now. "Something that's been on my mind for a while." The old woman placed another steaming cup down and turned to face him directly, though she didn't seem surprised by what was coming next. "Go ahead," she murmured simply. He took a deep breath before speaking, his gaze lingering on the rows of teacups laid out neatly in front of her. "I wanted to say something I never did." She tilted her head ever so slightly but remained otherwise still and calm. "I played here once before," he continued slowly, recalling the day like it was yesterday. "It didn't go well." Her eyes softened then, as if remembering a similar scene from their shared past. She picked up one of the cups and handed it to him without a word. "Thank you," he said after a sip, feeling warmth spread through him despite the cold air. They sat in companionable silence again for some time. As evening began to settle over the square, turning everything into shades of blue and purple, he finally rose from his seat with a nod toward her stall. "I should go." She nodded back, watching as he gathered his belongings. He paused briefly at the edge of the square before turning once more towards her. "You know," he said quietly, "I think I'll come back tomorrow for the festival. Maybe we can talk then." Her lips curved slightly into a smile that was barely there but somehow full of understanding. "Maybe," she agreed softly, watching him go. He stepped away from the square, each step measured and deliberate in the growing twilight, until he disappeared around the corner. The old woman stayed at her stall, returning to her routine. The sun had dipped below the horizon by now, but a soft light still lingered, casting golden glints through gaps between stalls. She looked down at her hands as they continued their steady dance of preparation and service. As night fell fully upon the square, she placed one last cup on its saucer with a gentle tap that resonated in the sudden quietness, a small, clear sound echoing softly across an evening filled with unspoken words and shared understandings.
The last light flickered off a distant window. Shadows crept into the square where only whispers remained, leaving the evening still. The kettle cools at the empty tea house. Until tomorrow.